These are some of the most hopeful images pouring out of social media from Tahrir Square. The student-led group, the April 6th Youth Movement, was able to mobilize thousands of Egyptians in an 18-day protest movement that culminated with the resignation of President Hosni Mubarak, who had ruled the country for 30 years. The Egyptian revolution may go down as one of the largest nonviolent campaigns to successfully overthrow a government. It highlights the strengths and some of the limits of a diffused youth movement that capitalized on social media to meet some of its early goals. By early February, cell phone video of Ramni Assam's protest song Arhal Irhal had been posted on YouTube and Facebook. It had made him an international sensation, but it was far from the only piece of social media to influence the outcome. Images of violence, of beatings, of water cannons and police batons streamed out of Egypt as the protest took shape. Though the videos themselves were shot by everyday Egyptians and broadcast on Twitter and posted on Facebook, there was an organizing force that acted as a clearinghouse for the ideas. The April 6th Youth Movement had started in 2008 to help a labor strike in the town of El Mahara El Kabra. They were able to mobilize thousands to converge on a single day of protest, but in the following days the Mubarak regime comes down hard on their leadership, and hundreds are tortured and imprisoned. The April 6th Youth Movement co-founders include Ahmed Mahar, a 30-year-old civil engineer in Cairo, and Monaku Asma Mahfouz, who was ultimately arrested in 2008. They had used their real names and real Facebook pages. The group pages became a place to put new ideas for protests and boycotts. They solicited plans to let others curate the page, voting on the best ideas. It let them crowdsource plans for a revolution. They had also disseminated books, like Gene Sharp's From Dictatorship to Democracy. The 83-year-old Sharp is now a senior scholar at the Albert Einstein Institute. He was interviewed on NPR by Steve Inskeep on June 25, 2011.
In this book, From Dictatorship to Democracy, you use the word realistic more than once. What is necessary in order to have a realistic plan for nonviolent protest against a dictatorship?
First of all, if you're living under a dictatorship, you really have to know that particular system extremely well, including its weaknesses, because dictators are never as powerful as they tell you they are. Secondly, you need to understand nonviolent struggle extremely well. And finally, you need to be able to think strategically.
Think strategically, meaning don't just create chaos, create a better situation.
You need to determine what are you going to do first. Do you identify weaknesses in the regime that are dependent on certain sources of power? How can you cut those sources of power off in order to weaken the dictatorship's power?
Why is nonviolent resistance preferable to violent resistance?
Because it's wise. Why should you choose to fight with your enemy's best weapons? That doesn't make sense at all. Nonviolent struggle is a kind of people power. You have a much greater chance of succeeding by you choosing the means that they're not equipped to deal with effectively.
April 6 was able to bring a new generation of activists into the realm of social protests. They were young, well-educated, and middle class. They were part of a generation that had a difficult time finding work. They filled the cyber cafes in metropolitan areas, becoming early adopters of social media. They had grown up under the repression of the Mubarak regime. They were also comfortable with technology and the flatter paradigms for spreading information. In 2008, April 6 Youth Movement's Facebook page gained over 70,000 members. WikiLeaks cables revealed that some of the organizers had met with U.S. representatives at the embassy in Egypt in December of 2008. They talked about an unwritten plan to overthrow the regime in 2011, but they were brushed off as mainly a fringe element by an unnamed State Department official who felt a gradual change to a more open system was probably the more likely course for Egypt. In the end, April 6 had a hard time duplicating their initial success. With some of their leaders rounded up and tortured, they began to lose momentum. Then history began to catch up. According to a direct quote from the Facebook page dedicated to his honor in the summer of 2010, Khaled Said, a 28-year-old Egyptian from the coastal city of Alexandria, Egypt, was tortured to death at the hands of 2 police officers. The details of the case still conflict, and in Mubarak's Egypt, facts are hard to come by, but the site released these photos. When Tunisians took to the streets to remove their dictator of 23 years in December, ousting him on January 14th, the anonymous Facebook page called for Egyptians to protest on January 25th. Others joined in. The most famous was the woman they called Facebook Girl. April 6 co-founder Mona Q. Asma Mahfouz, she goaded her male counterparts to take to the street.
يبقى تنزل تحميني وتحمي اي بنت نازله. لو فضلت قاعد في البيت تبقى تستحق كل اللي بيجرالك، ومش انت لوحدك. انت هتبقى مدان، انت هتبقى مسؤول، وانت اللي عليك ذنب كبير قوي، ذنب البلد دي وذنب كل واحد عايش فيها. انت هتبقى شايل مسؤوليه كل واحد نزل الشارع عشان يطالب بحقه وانت قاعد في بيتك. انزل البيت، ابعت مسجات لاصحابك، اكتب على النت في كل حته، وعي. انت عارف الدايره بتاعتك، عمارتك لوحدها واصحابك وقرايبك، بس قول لهم انزل معايا، نزلهم 5 ولا 10.
And they came. It was bigger than April 6, 2008, perhaps the largest nonviolent protest movement in modern history. The identity of the person behind the Facebook page We Are All Khaled Said remained hidden until an Egyptian Google executive, Wael Ghonim, admitted he created the page when he was released from prison after being swept off the streets during the protests by Egyptian police. He still denied being the leader of the protest movement, speaking at the TED conference back in March.
This is Revolution 2.0. No one was a hero. No one was a hero, because everyone was a hero. Everyone have done something. We all use Wikipedia. If you think of the concept of Wikipedia where everyone is collaborating content, and at the end of the day, you've built the largest encyclopedia in the world. From just an idea that sounded crazy, you have the largest encyclopedia in the world. And in the Egyptian Revolution, the Revolution 2.0, everyone have contributed something, small or big. They contributed something to bring us one of the most inspiring stories in the history of mankind when it comes to
The protests that start
revolutions.
January 25th continue to gather momentum. An interplay has begun with the West. In a pictorial graphic of tweets from the time of the revolution, Koves Boguda shows that many Western journalists were talking to other people in the West rather than communicating directly with activists on the ground in Cairo. Wael Ghonim was one of the exceptions, represented by his large purple circle near the bottom. He becomes a bridge. As Boguda points out, even if Westerners were still a few steps away from the action in Egypt, they were still performing a vital role relaying information to an international audience, perhaps acting as a hedge against further violence by the administration and rallying support in the West. In the few days after January 25th, the Mubarak administration follows a tactic in Tunisia and cuts off all cell phone and internet access. Time magazine published a workaround that protesters used to access social media using landline phones, but the lack of access to computers and cell phones showed that it was not really a Twitter revolution in Egypt. The protests keep going, even without the internet. Organizers in Tahrir Square were using old-fashioned community organizing techniques learned from people like Gene Sharp, Martin Luther King, and Gandhi. In the final days of January, first the police, then a group of Mubarak supporters attempt to retake the square, attacking Western journalists as well as the protesters. They stand firm, and on February 18th, the news is released that Mubarak is stepping down. In the month after the revolution, the April 6th youth movement and their allies have a difficult time staying at the center of the debate. Their motives are for a civil society. Their biggest challenge is a much larger and much more well-organized Muslim Brotherhood. As the summer begins, the Muslim Brotherhood stages their own rally. There are no members of the April 6th movement appointed to any of the seats on the interim council, though there is a nod to making the minimum age 25 and not 35. In July, as the military shows signs that they may attempt to hang on to power indefinitely, April 6th and a group of their allies return to the square, calling for a liberal democracy and a civil society. They want the release of prisoners swept up in the 18-day revolution. After a month on the street, the military government agrees to hold off writing the new constitution until after the elections in November. They also accede to another key demand, putting former President Hosni Mubarak on trial for the death of protesters in the Winter Revolution. In August, Mubarak has been called into court for the first time. As the jockeying towards the November elections continues, it's not clear whether April 6 will fill any of the seats. They have band together with several of the smaller religious minorities like Sikhs and Christians. But as of mid-August 2011, the outcome of the revolution is still in transition. But regardless of the outcome, the Google executive Wael Gohim says that in the end, they have won.
I was detained for 12 days, blindfolded, handcuffed, and I did not really hear anything. I did not know anything. I was not allowed to speak with anyone. And I went out. Next day I was in Tahrir. Seriously, with the amount of change I have noticed in this square, I thought it was 12 years. I never had in my mind to see this Egyptian, the amazing Egyptian. The fear is no longer fear. It's actually strength, it's power. People were so empowered. It was amazing how everyone is so empowered and now asking for their rights. Completely opposite. Extremism became tolerance. You know, who would imagine before the 25th, if I tell you that hundreds of thousands of Christians are going to pray and tons of thousands of Muslims are going to protect them, and then hundreds of thousands of Muslims are going to pray and tons of thousands of Christians are going to protect them. This is amazing. All the stereotypes that the regime were trying to put on us through their so-called propaganda or mainstream media are proven wrong. This whole revolution showed us how ugly such a regime was, and how great and amazing the Egyptian man, the Egyptian woman, how simple and amazing these people are whenever they have a dream. When I saw that, I went back and I wrote on Facebook. And that was a personal belief. Regardless of what's going on, regardless of the details, I said that we are going to win. We're going to win because we don't understand politics. We're going to win because we don't play their dirty games. We're going to win because we don't have an agenda. We're going to win because the tears that comes from our eyes actually come from our hearts. We're going to win because we have dreams. We're going to win because we are willing to stand up for our dreams. And that's actually what happened. We won, and that's not because of anything, but because we believed in our dream. The winning here is not, you know, the whole details of the what's going to happen in the political scene. The winning is the winning of the dignity of every single Egyptian. I had this taxi driver telling me, listen, I am breathing freedom. I feel that I have dignity that I have lost for so many years. For me, that's winning, regardless of all the details. My last word to you is a statement I believe in, which is, Egyptians have proven to be true, that the power of the people is much stronger than the people in power. Thanks a lot.